In tonight's Political Insider, a cybersecurity pact with China. On Friday, China's president visited Washington and held high-level talks with President Obama regarding allegations of cyber espionage. What was accomplished? For insight, we turn to our guest tonight on Capitol Insider, David Nakamura, reporter at The Washington Post. All right, David, tensions between China and the U.S., as we know, have been simmering, especially after allegations that government-backed Chinese hackers stole information from the Office of Personnel Management. Now, this past Friday, Mr. Obama said the two countries had a common understanding on the way forward. What did the two leaders agree to do?
It was a bit of a breakthrough, Morris, because this is an issue that's been bothering the United States for a long time now, and it's only growing worse. The issue you mentioned of the Chinese hacking of the Office of Personnel Management was the most public display, but behind the scenes, business leaders have been growing increasingly concerned about the theft of U.S. trade secrets. What the president and his counterpart, Xi Jinping of China, agreed on Friday was sort of a vague framework talking about that both governments would pledge not to engage in the theft of business secrets. What is less clear is exactly what that means and how enforceable it is. And President Obama himself said words need to be followed by actions. Over the coming months and years, you're going to have to see whether there continue incidents of this, and if so, what measures both countries can use to sort of hold each other accountable.
Now, David, China denies it did the hacking against OPM, and the country's president has spoken out against cyber espionage before. Will these talks do anything to actually stop hacks between the two countries? You indicated it's just actions speak louder than words. All right, so what happens?
What the United States is trying to do here was to say there's two different kinds of hacking. There's sort of the government hacking for national security secrets, in which the United States acknowledges that we do, and that the other countries do as well. And to some degree, they sort of agree to sort of that this goes on, you try to stop each other, but this is important for national security reasons. The other issue is economics, and this is where the United States says the United States does not engage in unfair practices on economic spying and cyber and espionage to business secrets, but that Chinese, there's evidence that the Chinese are doing this, and it's leading to concerns among U.S. businesses of why do we do business in China, and why would we do business with their companies there if, in fact, they have this unfair advantage. And that's really what's pressured the Obama administration to get tougher on this. Again, what we understand from Friday's agreement was there's sort of this broader framework in place, but we don't really know all the details of how enforceable it is, and sort of the devil's in the details. I think both sides know it. You're going to see real pressure on this Obama administration to show examples where if China is caught in doing this, how they come down on them.
Other issues were discussed as well during the visit, like climate change and human rights violations. How successful was this meeting overall? Do you see the relationship improving?
Well, that's a good question, because tensions have been growing over the past year. Last year, when President Obama went to China for a summit, they announced a big, broad framework of a climate pact in which China, which is the world's leading polluter, agreed by 2013 to reduce carbon emissions. And now that was, again, a broad framework. What they announced during this meeting last week was some specifics about how China would go about doing that. And one breakthrough was that they would have this sort of cap and trade policy on their emissions. And so that was a step that the Obama administration hailed as another breakthrough ahead of a world climate seminar in Paris in December, in which the Obama administration is trying to make some big announcements that other major countries, including China and India, have come together. On other issues, China and the U.S. remain far apart, including the sort of maritime security issues in which China is making some advancements in the South China Sea, much to the chagrin of U.S. allies and partners there. There was no breakthroughs on that issue, which has created a bunch of tension. And on human rights, I think the two countries remain far apart. China's President Xi Jinping said in the Rose Garden, as did President Obama, acknowledged that they have different views on human rights, but that China sort of sees that as their own domain and doesn't want sort of input from the U.S. And so that remains a big concern that will continue to sort of fray the tensions in some of these other areas, because there's going to be sort of, what will you do on certain areas versus what we want from you in other areas. So I think that's going to be a continuing tension point.
David, let's look ahead to the future. China has been a hot topic in the current presidential race. Donald Trump has been very critical. What else are the candidates saying about China?
Well, they're talking, Donald Trump is talking a lot about sort of the trade imbalances and saying that U.S. jobs have been going to countries like China, where, your low manufacturing costs have created this uneven playing field. And the Obama administration says some of that is rhetorical and full of hyperbole, and it's not really true. But I think what's happening on the campaign trail is not just Donald Trump, but candidates like Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side are all saying, look, pocketbook issues are important to Americans. A growing income gap has created sort of concerns for ordinary working Americans. This is going to continue to be a major campaign issue. And often China, what we've seen in the past, and is already true this cycle, is that China is then sort of held out and is an example of a country that's sort of, getting ahead based on unfair practices, on this trade imbalance. So it's going to continue to be the problem. What the Obama administration needs is to sort of temper some of that rhetoric, because the administration sees evidence that China is making progress on other areas like climate and maybe even some of the cyber security issues that we're talking about. So the Obama administration says we need to have continued engagement with China, and we can't just hold them up as sort of international bully and somebody we can't do business with. So that's going to be sort of the tension between the sort of campaign rhetoric you hear and what you hear out of the Obama White House over the next year.
Yep, I think you're right. David Nakamura, reporter for the Washington Post. Thanks for your insight. We'll see you next time, David.
Thanks, Morris.